Well, today, Brandon and I are going to share our journey in implementing the CSS framework part of Salesforce design system. And it's definitely a work in progress. It is not perfect. You can blow it apart. Miriam had some great things to say about our icon naming, but it is an evolution, and that's what we're going to talk about. Now, Salesforce is a publicly traded company. Let me get my clicker. So I am required to show you this. I'll pause for a moment while you read it. Now, the moral is, if you make any stock purchasing decisions today based on a design system talk, you need to see your therapist tomorrow. So let's talk about CSS and design systems. Now, when I say Salesforce, what do you think about? CRM, anybody? Right. And that's what I thought when I went to work there a little over a year ago. But when I got there, I realized there was a whole lot more. We have tons of clouds and acquisitions. We're basically just a big, fluffy, cloudy place. And we have in common what our clouds have is a lot of CSS written by engineers who would much rather be writing Java. So did we need a design system? We needed a design system, and we needed a framework in that design system. And it was a very big challenge. It was compounded with the fact that we were launching the new Lightning experience, which is the first time in 17 years that our UI was completely overhauled. So Lightning was an amazingly well thought out. It was a big team of, we have got about, I think, 100 people on our UX team. So it was a large team of UX designers, but it touches way more than the UI. There was a lot of data that is also involved. But in a company of over 20,000 employees, you can imagine what it takes to align this kind of effort. We've got hundreds of developers, a small team of designers, and an even smaller team of design systems folks. And we have a code base that's been around since Bill Clinton was president. So after seeing some of the CSS involved, we've had some people that have fled screaming into the abyss. In fact, I had an opportunity as a contractor back in 2007 to build the first version of the .com Developer Center, and I can only tell you that the CSS was additive. Just keep adding on. They took the C in CSS very seriously. Everything cascaded into everything else, and specificity battles ensued. We love specificity wars. Or, in this case, they didn't. Gotta love multiple descendant selectors with not a single declaration. So, of course, we needed some way to get all our clouds aligned with the myriad of coding styles, all different stacks. We had to make this thing work. First thing we needed to do was learn to crawl. In 2013, we had launched Salesforce One, which is our mobile app, and it was a very big step in this direction. And at the same time, we also took the first step toward a living style guide. And it was a really great first step. But a year later, at Dreamforce in 2014, the team had an opportunity to talk to a lot of developers that were trying to use this, partners and customers, and they heard some really interesting things. We found out that partners really want their stuff to look like Salesforce. Last I heard, we have like somebody said over 1 million Salesforce developers. Like the ecosystem that builds things on Salesforce is huge. So it's not just our internal folks. But our static guide was not giving them the resources to get to making their apps look like Salesforce. We also found out that partners were reverse engineering our CSS to try to match the style. Inspect element, anyone? And hope you can grab all the various pieces and get them in the right cascade order. So there was a lot of that. So what developer doesn't really just want a good copy-paste, right? So it wasn't just external partners that needed our help. We have internal customers as well. We want to empower our own designers. We want to give them tools to more quickly innovate and prototype. And we have the lofty goal of eventually having them design in the browser. So what we needed was a more complete living design system. We have launched the Lightning Design System, as many of you know. It's our evolution to try to meet those needs. It's made up of numerous pieces from design guidelines and patterns all the way to a mobile SDK. But for now, Brandon and I will concentrate on the CSS framework part of the design system. With the design UI elements or components, we eliminate the need for redline specs. We allow developers to reference actual code. They can copy paste. And the whole thing began with a huge design audit. And everybody got probably checked in by my old boss, Topher. Topher and Gina did a huge amount of this, taking all the comps from all the various designers and inventorying all the components that they had created. And as you can imagine, font sizes, shades of blue, spacing were very inconsistent and all over the place. And so they established design patterns for fonts, for spacing, for colors, for sizing to standardize, and then the designers would put that back into their specs and align them all. And to make it more scalable and resilient, we turned the standardized values into something we call tokens. And tokens are really constants that are equivalent to, say, a Sass or less variable. They store the value of specific properties, and we've abstracted these properties. These are some of the ones that we offer. We create these tokens using a tool called Theo. Basically, we create a JSON object, and then it is output to a huge variety of things, from Sass lesson stylus to mobile tokens to tokens that are used by our own internal developers. So here's an example of Sass tokens. These are just tokens exported in this format. The really beautiful thing about it, of course, is we can make painless sweeping changes to the CSS. So if our border's radius changes, and it's no longer 4 pixels in a new redesign, we just change it in our variable, and everybody gets the work for free. And it also allows external developers to change branding. They can actually override our variables and make their own branding. This is the tokens for internal developers. The same thing, different format. This is what they use. So our design audit alignment and our tokens allowed us to begin to build with a more efficient way of building our CSS. So this is going to sound familiar to many of you. Using an OOCSS type idea, we inventoried each component. We looked for the smallest atoms, Brad Frost, and we identified these pieces and patterns that made up the various components, started building small to bigger, and combined them to create even larger components. And one of the very first decisions we needed to agree on was our own naming conventions. Clarity is a really important principle for our entire UX organization, and we chose to use clarity to make sure that our class names were understandable. They're explicit, we use very few abbreviations, and yes, as you're thinking, might be a little verbose, but they're also much more easy to understand, and in an ecosystem the size that we're working with, clarity is a really important principle. BIM naming was another way that we make things clear, and you probably all know what it is, so I'm not going to go into that. But it makes naming, it makes naming easier for a large group of developers to understand. It's much easier to look at a class and know exactly what that class is. Is it a piece of another component? Is it a variation of a component or of a block? It keeps specificity very low, which was super important to us, so that we don't end up with these wars where everything has to be higher and higher and then somebody trumps it with important. We do use our own altered version of BIM. As Miriam Suzanne said, you know, take all the good things and make what works work for you. But we learned a couple lessons here. One of them is naming is hard. Do you guys ever get really stuck, like, what is this thing, and what is this part, and should I abstract it a little further? And yeah, so that part is hard. We all know that. But one of the weird, dumb things we've run into is BIM orphans. Do any of you have BIM orphans? BIM orphans occur when you refactor something. Like we had an unexpected tab refactoring. And in this tab life, they began as wonderful little BIM components, and then along came the big bad. We didn't realize there were some requirements that we didn't realize we didn't know. And so we had to refactor. And in the end, there was so little overlap that it seemed really dumb to put a class on that only did, you know, overflow hidden or something, right? A whole class for that. So these became stranded little modifier classes that have no block mama. Shit happens. I don't know what to tell you. That was a lesson. BIM has some other interesting challenges. At Salesforce, our core platform uses XML-based components, and they're rendered into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And XML, as you know, has some very strict rules. BIM naming uses a double dash. Guess what you can't have in an XML comment? A double dash. So, it's illegal, and what happens when someone comments out a bit of code in their XML is this beautiful thing, and it won't compile. Much wrath of developers was hurled at us. We are actually still trying to solve this one. We're open to thoughts. Please meet us afterward. We have a nasty, dirty little hack going right now that involves C data and some display nuns div thing. It's horrible. We'd love to find a better solution. But this is a weird one that we hadn't thought about when using BIM naming and then finding this little issue. So as we moved on and learned to walk, we found that enterprise applications have some very unique traits. This was kind of in our own audit. We found that with content, it's very data-rich. Applications really don't have vertical rhythm that a web page has. So headings and paragraphs rarely had any margin or padding or any space under them. So we just removed it by default. And we did some other somewhat unique things with headings. We don't know in an enterprise application framework where a developer plans to use these headings. We don't know what level they should be from an accessibility standpoint. And we want to encourage developers to use that proper semantic heading, not, hey, that H3 is the right size, let's put it there. So we equalized all our headings to our base font size. So if you put an H1 next to an H5, they're both going to be one rem. Then we created text utility classes that are placed on to get the sizing and the look, and we only have about 5 different heading looks. So they can use the proper semantic heading, put the class utility on it, and get exactly the look they need. We also found that lists are basically simple in enterprise. They're for data. They rarely need list markers, but it's semantically marked up data. So we removed all the list markers and margin and padding by default. But what if somebody's doing something like a feed, and or something that's a little more like in a composer? There's a couple ways you can opt back into spacing. They can use a utility class. We have all different utility classes that can be placed on the element itself. Or they can wrap a whole group of elements, headings, lists, paragraphs, in a wrapper with a single class that restores the normal rhythm, normal spacing that they would have. So there's a couple different ways to do it. Another big focus for us is accessibility. It's a mandate at Salesforce, which I absolutely love. I have always cared about that my entire 16 years of doing development. And so we baked accessibility in from the start. So where semantics matter, we use the proper elements where we can do that. ARIA roles are used where they are needed on our components, and we show instructions on how they should change. And sizing is defined in rem units. So when a user increases their base font size, they have a fully zoomed experience. And I know I hear the argument from people all the time, but wait, they can just hit browser zoom and it all zooms anyway. And that's true. But people with super low vision don't run around the web hitting zoom on every, they don't keep hitting zoom. They change their base font size. I have an aunt who has lupus and super Coke bottle glasses, and she has her base font size so big that words basically, in a component that isn't sized this way, she has to read down. It's really uncomfortable. So when you use rem units for your sizing of your components and somebody surfs in at 32 pixel font size, everything is scaled and the reading is just like it would be regularly. We also learned we needed to play well with others. Since some of the class names in our framework are common, let's say button, it might be in your own bespoke CSS, it might be in another framework we're being mixed in. There was an old Bootstrap framework that was made to look like older Salesforce. Many of our developers are transitioning over from that, so we're in there together to start. And that can cause, of course, cascade conflicts. So we chose to namespace everything with SLDS. So button became SLDS button. Every class in our CSS is that way. And it works really well for classes, but due to the variety of environments that our design system is used in, some of which are very old and have very different base styling and might not use normalize and might have set their body size to 75%, scaling all our components down to 3/4 of their size, we had to create a method of scoping to just take it one step further. And so you just basically use scoping with our components when the DOM is out of your control. And you can put a class either on the outer wrapper of the component, an SLDS class, or around a whole section of components that exist together. And this basically raises the specificity of the element selectors and makes everything in varying environments work out so that, let's say they've used a ULLI, this is an example from Visualforce, we actually win the war there because the class is higher. So any of the element selectors that are fighting with each other are protected. And this also protects them from our element selectors as well. So this is the basics of what we've begun with. And now my colleague and right-hand man, Brandon, who sits right by me and debates stuff with fruits, will talk about how we've evolved through some of the changes in our ecosystem.
Thank you, Steph. All right, now part two. How about we learn how to run a little bit? Probably more like jogging at this point, because we haven't gotten to a full sprint quite yet. But let me walk you through that journey of what we went through to kind of get to where we're at today. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard that term, if you build it, they will come. It's a pretty heavy-handed quote in my mind, a lot of confidence there. Because we kept asking ourselves, all right, so we're building this awesome thing, but how are we going to implement it at a scale such as Salesforce? Salesforce is a very big company with a lot of development teams. So there's a handful of questions that we continuously asked ourselves along the way. How do we keep the bar extremely low for adoption? Like I mentioned before, with the size of Salesforce, we have, at this point, I don't even know how many verticals or clouds we have because I keep finding out about new ones every single day. So that's something that we had to constantly keep in mind, and we still, to this day, have to keep in mind as we continue to build. The next question that continued to be brought up was, how do we maintain a level of consistency? Consistency is usually raised around the topic of consistent visual design, right? Makes sense. I mean, I think a design system is solving a portion of that. But from a framework perspective, or the framework portion of the design system is the implementation, the consistency of implementation across a wide-scale company such as Salesforce. And then lastly, this is something that we kept asking ourselves, and we kind of had to keep going back to it to make sure that we were right, which I think we still are. But how do we keep the system agnostic and stay agnostic and not give in to a lot of the demands of particular developers, like Stephanie mentioned, the thousands to a million to however many developers are, because we are dealing with internal and external developers within Salesforce. So staying agnostic was super important for us. So with those kind of main questions constantly being asked, we definitely knew one thing. And this one thing was a key to kickstarting the design system to be accepted, I suppose is the best way to put it. And that is to minimize your level of dependencies. Seems pretty straightforward. In product development, there's this thing called MVP, the minimum viable product. And the M part of it, minimum, we definitely focused on that. We took that very literally. And by doing this, we kept things simple. We didn't overcomplicate things. We didn't go down a path of saying we're going to support this stack or this stack. And so we felt pretty good about this. But then, I'm going to lead into kind of a lesson learned here. Even though you might feel really, really good about a decision made within the design system, something to continuously keep in mind is that you don't know what you don't know. Like you really don't. There's things that we learn every single day, and it might be because of the scale of Salesforce, but I'm sure every single one of you have dealt with it to a certain level. You have to understand what your ecosystem is that you're building a design system for. You have to understand your customers. Who's going to be the consumers of that product? And unless you can see the future, which most of you might not be able to, just try to understand where a potential footprint is. Because once you build it, and once you go down a path to support a certain version of one of the million libraries out there, you're going to have to continue to support it. So keep that in mind. Don't be a victim of your own success. In understanding, I think these 3 bullet points right here really allowed us to make the correct initial decision, and then also giving us the flexibility to adapt along the way. So anyways, lesson learned. Hopefully everyone got that. Back to where we were at. The minimum dependencies that we focused on were tokens, icons, HTML, and guidelines. Very basic, right? There wasn't a lot of dependencies. It's what browsers knew, it's what people knew, and it was a good starting point, the foundation of what we wanted the design system framework to be. But you might notice that there's something missing. There's no JavaScript. What? Crazy. Like, no JavaScript today, but I'm a React builder. I build on React. It's so cool. But this was kind of the key thing for us that I think allowed us to keep that bar extremely low within a company like Salesforce, because it allowed us to continue to stay agnostic to what we believed in. And that decision to not provide JavaScript actually provided a lot of flexibility for us, because then we allowed and guided the developer to implement JavaScript the way that they see fit. Because just to touch on a little bit at Salesforce, why we didn't include JavaScript, amongst those other reasons, is there's a lot of technology stacks that we knew of that Salesforce develop on today. So the top one is actually, we have our own proprietary JavaScript library, and that's obviously the main focus, but that's only one cloud and vertical that we had to deal with. There's also another cloud and vertical that dealt with React. There's another one that dealt with Angular, jQuery. This is just to name a few of the libraries, and we definitely didn't want to play favorites. So, because JavaScript manipulates the way that components look and feel based on the type of interactions that a user may invoke on it, we had to figure out, well, how are we going to demonstrate this to the user, to the consumer, I should say. So what we did is we relied on the information architecture and the documentation. I think like what Miriam was saying, if there's no documentation, there's really nothing. So documentation is super important, and we definitely believe in it, even though we might not want to write it, but we definitely believe in it. So what we did is we kind of took the information architecture that we have on the site, and we introduced this concept of states and variants. And I'm going to show you a little bit what that looks like. So here is the Lightning design system, and we're on a publisher component. And a publisher component be using something like a discussion feed. So on the right-hand side, we have what we call the component navigation. And what it does is it lists out the variants, and then underneath that variant of the component, we list out potential states that the component may be presented as. It could be manipulated, like I mentioned, through user interaction, through particular data being passed to that particular component. but we built a framework that allowed us to define the states on a component by component basis. So for example, I want to see what this component looks like when I focus on it. So I click that, and then our live preview will actually update with all the accommodating HTML that notifies the developer what kind of classes have been added to this component or removed or manipulated to show the potential outcome of what we're looking for. So this has taken us pretty far, and like I mentioned, we do love documentation. I still don't like writing it, but what we have done is underneath the component, we actually list out some documentation that provides guidance to the developer that shows how to properly implement the JavaScript through the user experience. Kind of what we expect to have happen based on the experience of that particular component. So we provide guidance there. And then we also take it a little bit further. And like Stephanie was mentioning, accessibility is #1 at Salesforce. And for some of the more complex components, we go out of our way and we document all of the accessible properties that need to be added to each particular element and what actually can be manipulated based on a type of interaction that a user can invoke. So next, I want to move on to, so we got jogging there a little bit. We're feeling pretty good about having a low level of dependencies, keeping things super agnostic, but of course there's going to be a couple potholes that we're going to have to jump over or trip in. And I'm going to talk a little bit how to possibly avoid those. So the documentation that we're just going over, there's a pretty big problem there. And then it's the fact that it's written. What happens when a change is needed? You have to rewrite it. And when you rewrite it, documentation might not make sense to a developer or a consumer that is using a previous version of your library. So for us, which kind of adds a level of complexity to that, is at Salesforce, we actually have 3 releases per year. And the design team, we actually have to support all 3 of those releases simultaneously. So that adds a whole nother level of complexity. So clearly we have our current production release. This is the release that we serve up to both internal and external developers. And this is the build that we're going to be using in our next release of the platform. But we don't want to leave anyone behind, so we actually have to support the previous version of the production release. And with that comes a little bit of maintenance, but also the design system team working with those particular development teams within the organization to provide a migration path to get them onto the new version of the Lightning design system. And then the most exciting one is the future production release. So at Salesforce, we have, I think it's a luxury or a blessing, but we are always in development, and we always might have 1 or 2, maybe even 2 releases that we're working on top of the 2 previous releases I was just talking about. But this is great, though, because I forget, it was talked about earlier, but it's an opportunity for us, for these future releases, to sit down with individual designers and work with them to figure out what kind of new patterns may we need in the design system, or what kind of components have we had in previous versions that we kind of need to revisit and update, because when it boils down to it, we are still a living style guide. And this is a system that is baked into the ecosystem that is going to evolve over time. So this leads into deprecation. Very common technique in software development. But I had some questions around what deprecation meant to us as front-end HTML, CSS developers, designs, I don't know what you want to call us, but we're something. So as a developer of the framework, these are some of the top questions that I had. How am I going to keep track of my changes over the span of the 4 releases that we're maintaining? When might be the right time to deprecate? I don't know, it's very opinionated, right? And then I backed out. Now I'm back. Sorry. All right. As a consumer, I have another set of questions. How do I know when something's deprecated? Like, that's the most important thing. If I'm using your framework or if I'm on your design system, when is this thing that I'm using just gonna straight up die? Like, we obviously don't want things to die, it seems sad, but we don't want it to die. But if we do need something to die, because at the end of the day, we don't want this thing to grow into an astronomical beast, and then it's just unmaintainable at that point. At some point, some things might need to pass away. So that leads me into discussing what we have on our site right now. This was kind of our initial stab at deprecation. We have this thing at the bottom of our pages called the component overview table. And here we list out essentially all the available classes that can be applied to a particular component that will provide a certain set of outcomes. This can be element classes, modifier classes, JavaScript classes, everything. I mean, everything that you can think of. But, so we thought utilizing this table was gonna be the end all be all. Let's just flag this thing as deprecated and let's move along. But that didn't really work for us. It wasn't ideal. It caused the developer to do a little bit more like searching on the website. It wasn't really presented in front of them. So we thought about this. We thought about what can we do with the tools at our disposal. So we thought, well, hey, we are developing with Sass. Like, Sass is a primary language that we use to build out this framework. Let's deprecate with Sass, right? Makes sense. So we decided to come up with this little thing called Sass Deprecate. Pretty fancy, right? I'm going to show you a little bit of how it works. It's definitely integrated into our system. It might not work for everyone, but let me just go over a little bit for you right here. So the way that it starts is, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the concept of Semver. If not, if you ever use something like Node, Semver is essentially a major minor patch release versioning. And so we applied this to our Sass files. So whenever a release happens, either it be breaking, a minor, or a patch release, this number will be updated. So it's pretty flexible. So what we did is we took that and we said, okay, what can we pass to that number to provide a level of deprecation for our code? So we said, okay, we definitely need a version number that will trigger a piece of code to actually deprecate inside of the code base. And then, obviously, we want to tell the person why we're deprecating it or what to use if we do deprecate it. So then after that, here we start by simply just providing the app version of what we're currently in, and say in this release we introduce something like button icon. Yeah, hypothetical, very simple, right? But in version 2, we want to deprecate this class and then warn the developer that in version 3 of our application, this class is no longer going to compile. So there's a couple of advantages to this. It gives the developer a defined number of versions before an actual breaking change. So we're buffering them. We're helping them along with the migration process. And that's why the message is so important. But honestly, my favorite part of this feature is I don't have to think about it. Like, this type of deprecation code is actually filtered throughout our entire code base. And when we just organically update to a certain version, that code is now gone. And so the end result could look something like this over time. And it's something that allows your code base to not become bloated. If this design system is so baked inside of your ecosystem, you don't want to be on the blue path. You want to be on the yellow path. So, that's a little bit of a highlight of the Sass Deprecate that we came up with. I do encourage everyone to go check it out. We actually have it open source right now. And the design system is also open source, which you can see how that code is actually used in a production environment. And with that said, go forth and deprecate some stuff. But do it with a little bit of confidence. Don't be scared, just have a little bit of confidence. That's kind of it for us. But I wanted to say one last thing before I get off stage. We currently are hiring right now. So if you want to work on a project like this with me and Stephanie and Gina and Kalig and Ton, please feel free to come grab us at some point, either after hours, and we can discuss a little bit about that. So thank you very much.
All those things. All right, that was the look at Lightning Design System that I wanted to have in a way. One of the things it's Theo. Theo is one of the things. That's the name of it, and that's the thing that like it's kind of it looks like JSON, but it's like a language you invented, kind of, right? That's like it's like pre-Sass or whatever, right? It's kind of
It is JSON.
It is JSON.
Literally JSON.
The JSON gets passed through the Theo tool, and then the spits
and isn't
out
it
all
wasn't
of
the
this
like
stuff.
the idea that I don't know, some of our properties use your weird internal CSS thing that's not really Sass, and some people actually use Sass because we kind of want to make this public too, and maybe we could even make it compile to something like iOS friendly, or maybe somebody's using Stylus and we want to output something compatible to that. So it's kind of like this meta language below all that, which just makes sure that this like configuration that you're writing lasts
It's
forever.
subatomic.
Subatomic?
Subatomic.
Good, subatomic. So is that part open source or not?
That
Theo
is
open source.
that is, yes.
It is, good. Yeah, that's worth having a look for. I think that's one of the reasons to have a design system at all is that it works across multiple properties and stuff, and it's like if you just if you're like, I'm just gonna make a Sass one only, then you're limited to, I guess, the web and whatever. I don't know. Is that a thing? Are you excited about it? It seems worth being excited about.
Absolutely.
Very.
I love the web, Chris.
Good, but other things too. Sometimes I look at HTML, and do you get this when there's like div class, and then there's like, it's so long that it wraps in my browser because there's so many classes on it?
Class names.
Yeah, does that freak you out ever? Or are you just like, that? Do you think class names need to be forever, or when you redesign, is it like you're reevaluating those classes as well? I don't know, that's like a little abstract question, but sometimes it freaks me out when there's like 50 helper classes on something.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to go down the path of like single purpose classes.
Yeah.
I mean, the classes, hold value in their own right, and
Right. So how do you approach a new class name? I see certainly like you're not afraid of _ small, like that's a thing, right?
Is that a thing?
No, that wouldn't be a thing.
That's
it would
not
be
a thing?
dash
I don't
small.
know.
Well, but
Get your
Yeah, that's
bin
not a
straight.
thing. Yeah.
keep my bum straight.
Well, truthfully, it's a debate we have because we do have utility classes. And, so you can put margin on the sides by utility class, or you could put it on using the class that's already on the component. And it is, it's a Cap-Watkins debate sometimes, looking at building a component, where do we want to add an extra class, and where do we want to keep it in the component itself, that component class itself, so that perhaps on mobile we can change it through a media query.
Yeah, and I mean, if you went heavy-handed in one release, now you have this way to back out of that choice.
Yeah, and it's kind of how that has been used up to this point.
Is it? Okay.
Where we, in a couple of releases, got a little heavy-handed with, say, embedded utility classes on a certain component.
Is it the culture of the team that is willing to deprecate, or is everybody, do you kind of train that in? I don't know, I really like that idea of the yellow path, as you put it. Like, let's make sure this thing doesn't bloat over time. So you need people who are not afraid to just be like, we're getting rid of that.
And to be perfectly opaque, is that right? Transparent? I don't know. To be
Transparent.
clear? Transparent?
Transparent's the one.
I mean...
Opacity 0.
I know, right? Exactly. Get your transparency straight. One of the reasons that really caused Brandon to come up with this deprecation idea was when we were rolling from one version to the other, and we realized that our Salesforce ecosystem had adopted this so rapidly, which honestly, we expected it to be a while before we were in product core. We expected it to be used more for our prototypers and our external developers, and suddenly we were going into core. And there were things we knew that we wanted to, like our naming, like deciding how to name a wrapper of something, of a component.
That's tough.
Right. Do you just put a dash? Do you put dash wrapper? Well, we came up with the idea that we use a single underscore. So then we needed to go back and make everything consistent. And so when we found out we were going into core, Brandon and I went and locked ourselves in this room called the library, where no one can find you. And we spent the week there, like refactoring everything that we knew we wanted to refactor before, you know, it got more difficult. Right. And so we deprecated those things.
That's wild, though. That's because I mean, the more the deprecate, is there like a danger of losing trust of people that worked one, or if the deprecation path is 80% of the class names they picked in the last version?
They would kill us.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we don't get to that point, but it's also a thing
sure,
that it's a part of the culture where being a part of the design system, we want to lend that helping hand to make sure everyone is following the proper migration path, and we walk the developer or consumer of it through that appropriately.
Does it like console.warn or whatever in Sass, is that where you see those messages?
Yeah, when you, so I should have showed the slide, but there was it spits out in your terminal, and once we spin up our server, so it'll notify you before you start your development that day, like, hey, we found some deprecated code at this spot.
Cool.
Use this instead, or remove. So,
is there somebody on your team who is a benevolent dictator or something, or is it more even than, is somebody protective of like a CEO swoop and poop or whatever? Somebody come in and be like, you know, y'all need a hamburger thing in here, you know? And
Not really. I mean, we work really closely with our UX designers, and I think we've developed a really good level of trust already. And we consult with them, we sit down with them, and they'll say, we think we need this, and we'll say, but we have this, and they'll go, oh, wait, yeah. So we try to point them to patterns we already have, and then we don't have any overlord, really, that is forcing things in.
yeah.
And,
good.
yeah,
It's just kind of team agreement on what goes in and what doesn't. Because, I mean, that was a little bit part of the talk, right? We listen to what people need, but not too much, right? You don't just accept any need that's...
We do have some challenges with having different clouds that have different requirements, and we do have some evolution and decisions to make about how much of those different bits go into the design system if it's only one cloud that needs something specific. So those are challenges we're trying to solve right now.
The old one-off problem.
special snowflakes.
Special snowflakes is what we call it.
We do prefer metaphors here at Clarity. The metaphor you used for both talks to guide them together was the crawl, walk, run thing, and you used it specifically to the lightning thing. But it's probably that's again a pretty good metaphor for any of us to use, like for any design system. It could be you have a different crawl than you had, or a different walk than you had. There's also been stories of failures of design systems, so I wonder if some failures could be prevented at that crawl stage, you know, rather than like trying to go to a run at first and then get in the garbage bin for the thing. Is there?
I think it was like those lesson learned slides that we kind of threw out there is just doing the research and having a better understanding of who you're going to be touching, you know, in that respect, like when it comes to a design system.
Crawl is who.
Yeah. And so just having a better understanding of that, I mean, mistakes are inevitable. I mean, but I think mitigating those mistakes and learning to adapt to those is probably the best advice.
I think my biggest, the thing that keeps me up at night is, okay, you know, we've built this thing and it's being embraced and it's very successful, and now it's being adopted by a ton of different ecosystems, different stacks, different clouds.
I want to ask you more about that at the moment, because it's Salesforce, internal, external, and then is there like external? What if I want to use it? Would you listen to me, or am I like totally outside of the sphere of it?
In
Are
the
people
open
are like
source-
randos building websites on Lightning Design?
Well, because of our font, the Salesforce Sans font, that's the only reason it's supposed to be hosted on like Heroku or a Salesforce property.
Oh, interesting.
I suppose if you took our font out, you could use anything you wanted. But to be perfectly honest, we're not Bootstrap.
Right.
We're not trying to solve anything but Salesforce ecosystem patterns
Yeah.
and issues. So you probably wouldn't want to
The scope of
use
Salesforce
our-
is big enough.
Yeah,
you're
oh, yeah.
So the fact that there's lightningdesignsystem.com is interesting. We can look at it, we can learn from it, but it's not even trying to be a please download this.
I
and use it.
have heard of,
Yeah.
other people that are building applications that are using it. I don't know that they're supposed to, but I don't tattle.
It looks like you're in some of the documentation for it. It's not just people think of the documentation for a design system in different ways. But there's some of it is just like this was generated by Sass doc or something, and it's just little examples. You might see a chunk of HTML that you're supposed to copy and paste or something. But your documentation includes like human written paragraphs explaining things and stuff, which is a whole different level.
We hate this.
Yeah, you do.
No, we love it. We love documentation. It's
Yeah.
painful to write.
Is it? And,
Yeah.
and you literally write, like, you would use this in this circumstance because of this, this, and this. And that's like,
And now that Greg is working at Salesforce as a dev evangelist, and he is building using our things, he is showing me at home while we're working, Stephanie, this piece of documentation is missing. And I said, we will give you rights, and you will do a PR.
yeah,
And you will
add
write
to
it.
repo. Yeah.
and I will accept your PR.
That's good. I was thinking about during this whole thing a lot of that, like how long has this been around and dealing with deprecation, but you handled that pretty well. You are not afraid to do it, and I think there's definitely people in this room that struggle with that. The blue line, the growth of CSS, like it's so dangerous deleting CSS, and you just
We never said we
seem
weren't
to-
afraid, did we?
Dude, oh, I'm
are
scared.
still afraid.
We're scared to
No, I'm
death.
just
What is there? What are you scared of? Is there like
Well,
a
I
Git
think
repo that's just piles
us,
up?
for us now that we're in core especially, it's a lot more pressure. And we've just agreed to, it's sort of case by case. We will have some things that won't get deprecated, even if there's a better way to do it. We won't break things, but there will be other things that will have to be deprecated because they've evolved. So it's a case by case thing that we work with our styling team on.
Yeah, nice. It seems like a dreamy job, right, people? You want to go work for Salesforce.
I love it.
Anyway, thanks very much for talking to me and for your talk.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.